Immigrant Names and Manifest Searches, Part 3. I am Joel Weintraub. This is a revised YouTube video. The original file was deleted. I found additional resources in immigrant records to include, so many that I decided to make a 3-part video series. This is Part 3. Have you seen Parts 1 and 2? Hope you have. Part 1 provided the necessary background information to understand the preliminary forms for Petition for Naturalization. That's its title. I discussed the process using actual documents and correspondence. Next, I looked at immigrant name changes and spelling and how they impacted manifest searches to verify entry into the U.S. Then I started an inventory of immigrant name changes looking at first and middle names. That was Part 1. Part 2 continued looking at actual immigrant name and spelling changes in different name categories, and some immigrants with something called unable to verify manifest searches. You can look over the Part 2 topics. Part 3 starts where Part 2 ended, by looking at some other names that immigrants said they used from the preliminary form. I hope you see the video series in the order it was recorded. So here are Part 3 topics. People who hid their name, used different names, snuck in a non-family member, used somebody's not extra, but somebody's other ticket, misunderstandings, and we'll look at some other stuff at the end. Those forms provided information about how the immigrant came into the United States. It was required before a petition could be filed. And my sample is I looked through about 900 preliminary forms, often more than once. I saved for possible use those that indicated they used another name and the reason for it, and those who the immigration clerks were unable to verify. I also saved records that had correspondence or made a point that I wanted to emphasize. There are more such records than I included in this video series. Let's look at category, the first one, at least on this part, hiding their real name, using an alias. And we'll start with Count William DeWitt. He actually is not quite an alias. He shortened his name. He was born in 1899 in Switzerland. He arrived in 1921. You're looking at a 1926 preliminary form from New Orleans. Here's a scan of William's preliminary form for this petition for naturalization. For some reason, the New Orleans court records have some information lined out, but it's still readable. Not sure why they did that. I'll show you his ship manifest line. It's over there. That's from the manifest. And you can see it's Willie there. The name section at the top of the form's page 1 you're looking at usually has quite a bit of interesting material. We find that William has shortened his name because, quote, I was afraid of the Bolsheviks as members of my family have been killed. The box in the upper left with the clerk's initials and the check marks on the page all indicated that a certificate of arrival could be issued. So all those things he indicated were checked off. However, that's only one part of the process. He didn't become naturalized off this application. And looking at the bottom of this form, states he arrived in the U.S. in 1921, gives the ship, and then he says he's coming here to study American life. This particular immigration card that you're looking at from New Orleans shows that William was out of the country and returned in April 1926. And unless he got special permission, that would violate the requirement he spend at least 5 continuous years in the U.S. before the petition is submitted, and he had to have the last year in the U.S. state of the Naturalization Court, which would be Louisiana. Perhaps that is why he didn't become a citizen in New Orleans. He had an interesting life, and I can go into more details. There are a number of newspaper articles on him. I couldn't find out what a jailed person with his name and other matching information was charged with in 1950. He was in the Los Angeles jail. He finally became a citizen in 1949, and you can see he didn't give his Beverly Hills address, not his street address. Instead, he gave a Bank of America in Beverly Hills, California. Really strange. The second one is Carlo Tavero. He was born in 1895 in Italy. He arrived in 1914, and you can be looking at his preliminary form. Carlo came in under the name of Mariano Marofo in 1914. The reason for the use of another name was, I did not want to serve in the Austrian army. Who wanted to do that? You can see the immigration clerks were unable to verify his information in the upper left box. Let's scroll down the bottom of this first page. I don't think that his statement he came in at Brooklyn, New York, was a determining factor. That's not a port. I easily found him on his stated ship and arrival date. The preliminary form appears dated 1926. So you can see that this is from the Steve Morse one-step website, and it's a index to names of people arriving in Ellis Island, at Ellis Island. Here's his New Orleans Naturalization Index card. He submitted a declaration of intention in 1924. The next major step, the petition, could have been completed as early as 1927, at least 3 years after the declaration. But it appears he started the second process a little earlier on his preliminary form. The actual naturalization date on this index card is 1930. His attempt at citizenship may have run into some problems. Look at another one, Walter Moeller, born 1902 Germany, arrived 1922. A number of New Orleans preliminary forms were from seamen who left their ship. They didn't have tickets. Some deserted. Here Walter, who modified his name, indicates, I deserted a German ship and did not want to be caught. This happened in 1921. So it's just a slight modification of his name. You can see he legalized his status, the bottom of the page, by paying a head tax and other paperwork. The POMO abbreviation I couldn't find online, but guess it might be persons of miscellaneous origin. That's a pure guess. And I'm showing you his naturalization index card, and it shows that he got the petition, and I assume he became naturalized in New Orleans. Here's another deserted seaman who hid his status on his declaration and his preliminary form. The immigration clerks found out he deserted his ship and had not paid a head tax. He was doing fraudulent against the U.S. government, although at the last minute he tried to do that. They weren't lenient with him, even though they issued a certificate of arrival that you see, but wrote him that they generally didn't support naturalization requests for his situation. I don't know if he became a citizen. I doubt he was successful. I could not find him after this in the U.S. Census. I did more research on this immigrant card that you're looking at, as I couldn't figure out how the immigration clerks found his manifest line. But the New Orleans scans usually only show the first 2 pages of the original 4-page application, and not any follow-up forms. Perhaps when Judah Schultz submitted the second form, his information solved the problem of where he was on the manifest. He was only 9 when he came to the U.S., but it's his last name on the manifest, Schultz, that he's using on the form that I don't understand. So here's a lot to unpack here. This is his form. First, why special? This is my interpretation, which might be wrong. The declarations show they only have a 7-year lifetime. If you wait too long to file the petition, it expires, and you have to start over again. Thus, he was close to that limit and the special handling. That's my assumption. The form date is hard to decipher, but looks like 1926. Immigration clerks were unable to verify his ship information. I couldn't find Judah Schultz using the gold form at stevemorse.org. But then I noticed, typed on the form above his name line, is Lieb Sloja, which I can find that on the ship. Judah's middle name was his first name on the manifest, but Sloja to Schultz? Note, and I'll point this out, his mother is Slava Levin. They were going to Jacob Schultz in New Orleans. According to this preliminary form, that's where they were going. It's interesting that he says the passenger he was traveling with was Slava Schultz. Was he aware at the time of the family name switch? Judah indicated, and I'll show you this, that he resided in New Orleans from 10 days after arrival to when his application was submitted. The book index, which is a separate document than the ship manifest, associated with his voyage, shows the family and the sheet and line number thereon. It's a very useful resource. Slava's first name is still mangled. The ship manifest has seen better days. I argue in another video that most of the damage was done in the late 1930s or very early 1940s. This is an example of one of the sheets from that voyage. The family, they're in the upper left with the cut-off left side of the page, which you can just see says omitted, was held for special inquiry. The manifest, show you that, shows they're going to a brother, Joseph Levin, in Philadelphia, not the husband who was then in New Orleans. Perhaps the reason for questions about the family leading to their special inquiry board hearing was this mix-up. I found husband Jacob's preliminary form for naturalization. He states his name is Jacob Schultz. Came into Philadelphia in 1903, going to Joseph Levin in Philadelphia. But then Jacob indicates that he resided in Louisiana since December of 1904. A great guide to understanding and interpreting such manifest annotations that you're seeing on these documents I'm posting to you is by Marion Smith at JewishGen. I'll show you website addresses in the show notes. Here's Slava and her 3 children on the special inquiry list. The list was created at Ellis Island. Note that Slava's name is now more like she was called. The immigration clerks did try to put down accurate name information. They were held as LPC, you see those initials there, or likely public charge, that's LPC, a catch-all category. They were admitted and traveled to New Orleans. And so this family is the second one you're looking at. The children's name are not shown. It's just the mother and 3 children. I found them, the family, on the U.S. 1910 census in New Orleans. Jacob is the husband, and Lewis shows on this list, but he's not using Judah for his first name. He picked that up later. The New Orleans Naturalization Index has 2 cards for him. Only the one under his ship manifest shows both names. So one of the names at least gives you a chance of finding him on the ship manifest a little bit easier. Why the Schultz used Sloza on the manifest of their family name, I don't know. It's a mystery. It's not the mother's maiden name. Jacob Schultz on his own form left that blank. He didn't know his mother's maiden name. The census documents have their Schultz name. Apparently the family did not want to immigrate under their original name and leaving their country, and thus avoided potential problems with their authorities. It makes it difficult for family researchers to find their ship information. A new category, Unrelated Family Member. I have in my own family research a mystery couple that appears on the ship manifest and other documents like on a United Kingdom immigration list embedded with a real family. The family is well researched, but who the 19 and 20-year-olds are, Rachel and David, are unknown. They disappeared after the family crossed the Canadian border into the United States. Other family researchers have experienced the same situation of an unknown member on the manifest. And here's Rachel and David. They're certainly old enough to have traveled on their own to the United States. Perhaps the only way I'll ever know, and I've looked, is if they applied for U.S. citizenship, explained how they entered the U.S., and their online transcribed naturalization records show both their actual name and the name they used on the ship documents. Which leads me to the situation of Adam Shearer. Adam John Shearer. He was something like 10 years old when he arrived. He's born in Yugoslavia. I'm going to show you his preliminary form in New Orleans. The immigration authorities appear to have accepted his information. Look at all the check marks. Let's see his use of another name on this thing. And he says, I have not used another name to my knowledge, but then he hedges. I may have been taken as the son of party I came with. And he lists the names of Adam John Shearer or Adam Strunk on his ticket. He's not sure exactly what would be found on the manifest. He arrived in May 1909 on the ship Argentina. His preliminary form indicates he was going to his father, Adam Shearer, in Wisconsin. The person who bought his ticket in Europe was Frederick Strunk. Adam was born in Uzsov, Yugoslavia. You also see the town shown as being in Hungary. Here's his 1910 census with his family, and indeed they are in Wisconsin. It raises a number of questions. Why did they leave Adam behind? Did Sister Lena there, about the same age, come with them, or did she come like Adam? What happened to Lena? She disappears after the census and is not mentioned in her parents' obituaries in the 1940s. Did a lot of research on these families. Note the census answers makes it look like Adam came with a family in 1903. That's on the right column. Same with the 1920 census, but now they're in Cleveland. I couldn't find any naturalization records for Adam Sr., Christine, or Lena, or their 1903 immigration manifest. Not sure where they were. Back in Cleveland, Adam submitted his declaration of intention. That's what you're looking at. It doesn't indicate he came under a different surname. It would be difficult to find him on the ship manifest with this document. You'd have the ship name, but he's under a different name. He's hiding under another name. That could make his family genealogist frustrated. I'll show you the bottom of this declaration. He completed the petition process in New Orleans, again only showing his legal name. I'm showing you an index card for that. If you were a Strunk family genealogist, you would wonder who that Adam person was on the ship manifest embedded in the family. Let's look at the Strunk's Argentina 1909 ship manifest. The handwriting isn't the easiest to read here. A transcriber made their last name into Strnny. The special inquiry list has them as Strung. Another variation they used is Strunk. So here their hometown is spelled Qusove. You can see that Frederick and Katerina brought across 5 children, including Adam. Note in the left column that they were sent to special inquiry. Met that challenge, and most were admitted, but one was not. She was deported. Here is the special inquiry list. Only 6 of them are here. The 7th has her own line later. They were stopped for this inquiry because of LPC, or likely public charge. It was called catch-all of putting people in a higher level of security. Here is Elizabeth Strunk's special inquiry line. She was found to have trachoma, an incurable disease at the time, and a mandatory reason for deportation. That could lead to blindness. She went back on the return voyage of the Argentina. It would be interesting to see if another family member accompanied her, perhaps Katerina, who was 25 at the time, and I can't find any records of Katerina after the manifest. You're looking at a stereograph of the Ellis Island process of checking for trachoma, using an eye hook to roll back the eyelid. Not very sterile and very painful. I had a number of questions about the 1909 manifest Strunks. The main one was whether any more, aside from Adam, of their 4 manifest children were not related to them. I spent quite a bit of time on that main question, and instead of putting my findings here, I'll add an addenda to the end of this video so you can see my methodology, analyze the correlations, and possibly contribute to the research. I'll add to the show notes any new findings. Okay, let's go to another category, used another person's ticket. We're looking at Mary Josephine Donahue's record. She used Ellen Donahue as her name. The reason, quote, I came to this country on my sister's shipping paper. What I've done is I've just cut out the section of importance. But the main one I want to tell you about is George Thomas. He's born in 1882 in Hungary. He arrives in 1911. His name is probably not George Thomas, but Thomas or Giorgio or something like that. We're going to be looking at a 1928 preliminary form from West Virginia, in which we'll see both his original and then an update and a bunch of correspondence. So here is his original form. As I say, there's quite a bit of correspondence in this file. You can see in the upper left that his information led to an unable to verify above that box. This is dated July 10th, 1928. Just a few weeks later, I see the following letter by his lawyer to the naturalization people. He says, Gentlemen, I write you asking, or now he's doing this to the Naturalization Service in Pittsburgh. Gentlemen, I write you asking at the convenience of your good office that you advise me as to your rules and regulations attaching to the following proposition. If a native of Hungary should buy a ticket to this country and then decide not to use it and would sell it to another countryman at a reduced rate, and then the man to whom he sold it would use the original purchaser's name and come to this country on this ticket and make application for naturalization papers, would this circumstance be a bar to naturalization papers for the man who last bought the ticket and used the original purchaser's name in traveling to this country? Thanking you in advance. You're going to see it's not just his name, but his information, though. And then the service wrote back, we have your letter, you submit a hypothetical case, etc., etc. We infer from your statement of fact, etc., etc. Then they say, and I'll make it easier for you to see this, they say, we recently had a case of this nature in the U.S. District Court at Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in which the court denied the petition for naturalization to the alien in question for the reason that he had entered the country illegally. The arrival in that case was prior to the operation of the quota laws that started in 1921. The facts were that all the data appearing on the immigration records, such as date and place of birth, name and residence of wife, etc., related to the person from which the ticket was bought, rather than the person who claimed to have actually entered the country under the other man's name. We have frequently seen men admitted, however, who claim to have come on a ticket of another individual, but in those cases, sufficient of the descriptive facts on the immigration records related to the individual who actually entered the country at the time to satisfy the court that he was the man actually inspected. And they say this is about as far as we can go with your hypothetical. If you have such a case which is right for our attention, you submit it with all the facts in the regular way. And that's what they did. So the lawyer said, okay, I'll do that. Attention, this person. I wrote to you on July 23rd, reference to a client of mine, and I beg to report now that I received your letter, etc., and wish to thank you for the letter. As directed by you in the last paragraph of your letter, I am here with submitting this case to you. You will note that my client's name is George Thomas, and that prior to this date he petitioned your good office for a certificate of arrival so it might regularly come on in due time for citizenship papers. This petition to you was defective, and I have had him execute an additional application, and I'm herewith submitting to you both the original and duplicate petitions. You had to do that. That's part of the process. To aid and help your office in this case, I want to remind you of the fact that the name of the man who actually came over to this country was my client, George Thomas, and the ticket he came over on and purchased was for one John, actually, and it's Ivan on the manifest, Christen, etc. So what do? Well, not only did Ivan on the manifest, not John, buy the ticket, but he would have provided his own information to be added to the manifest by the shipping company. When an immigrant buys a ticket, then that person would have filled in a form that provided information for the questions on the ship manifest. The ticket represents the person and their vital information. A comparison between the preliminary petition for George should not match the information on the ship manifest. I'll show you one of these documents that they had to fill out in 1911. It looks like no one wanted to answer this question about citizenship or provide information about his citizenship status on the 1930 and 1940 U.S. Census. So these were census questions that were asked. And looking at Thomas's response, it looks like no one responded to that. The year of immigration, that was probably left blank. Naturalization, 1930, unknown. In 1940, citizenship of the foreign-born, they didn't put down anything. Alien, PA first papers, NA. So my strong suspicion is that it was denied, that his request to issue a certificate of arrival was denied, and therefore this petition could not go forward. Another category, name influenced by outside situations, mistakes, and misunderstandings. Here in this record, the immigrant indicates, probably for his last name, the first is probably a nickname, that he used another name because, quote, error on spelling my name when I started work in this country. It's ambiguous on the form if this other name was used extensively, was his present name, or just for this one situation. Here's another one unable to verify. Here they had the wrong date and ship name, but the right port. And his reason for using another name was a mistake other people gave me. So Anthony becomes Anton, and maybe, that's what he thinks the change was. That's really a minor change. But I included this. I want to show you something interesting. Go down and show you the rest of this. You can see that they crossed out the name of the ship. It wasn't the Bremen, it was the George Washington, and also the month and day. He was wrong about that. So here is his manifest, and on the top is what I get from looking at the Steve Morse Gold form, trying to find him, and the transcriber mistranscribed the first letter of his last name. That's a real killer when you're doing name searches, because they couldn't figure out that was an M. But if you look at his line, it says abandoned domicile 9621, and it says see file 99, looks like a 582/989. Well, that's an annotation. What does our Marion Smith guide say? And she says, she has this example. She says among the most perplexing annotations are reference to various record checks and correspondence, lacking enough information for modern researchers to decipher their meaning. That said, familiarity with immigration records and procedure can often provide likely explanations or possibilities for further research. The example above includes an Ellis Island correspondence file number, that 985. Ellis Island files generally begin with 98 or 99. What was the subject of this correspondence? We may never know. So apparently these files were not in existence, were not scanned. Here's another one. The person said that the name I'm showing you was given by mistake at the charity hospital. So Andrew Tiernan says, well, I was once known as Andrew Dianen, but that may have been a one-time occurrence. Here, a French consular office official created a record with a wrong spelling. Isaac, the person, immigrant, was born in Aleppo, Syria, interacted with the French consulate, made his way to France, where he left for the United States. I'm showing you parts of his record here. And so he was upset because his last name appears on the ticket as Beteiche instead of Betish. I mean, the proof of this is, anyway, he's going to his uncle, the last line here, Sorrel Betish, so there's the family name. And when you look at his naturalization card, the index, he didn't use the misspelled name. It's really a minor change anyway, but he was well aware that it was a mistake. He wasn't going to accept what they said, hey, here's your name, with the official consulate person. This is a little bit more complicated. Here we have a person by the name of Wojciech Pilisic. He's born in 1893 in Austria. He arrives in 1913. And we're going to be looking at a West Virginia preliminary form he filled out. I have reevaluated this record after reviewing information on his preliminary form. And there are a number of questions here. Why did he get it unable to verify? What first names did he actually use, both on documents and, in general use? Which names of his was misunderstood by authorities? He said they were. And what were their interactions with him? And actually, I made a mistake on the original video, and that's one of the reasons I deleted it to do this 3-part video. So here we're going to answer the first question, why they unable to verify in the upper left margin. And it says here, the Kronlin did not go to this port, basically. And if we look at this, we will see unable to verify Baltimore, Maryland. The reason it's unable to verify is it's the wrong port. You think that these immigrants would remember all these details. It's been a decade or so before that he went. He doesn't remember it. Maybe the only name on the ship is on the outside of the ship. And he got to see it on arrival and departure. This is his subsequent form, shown here, indicates he came through New York. He enclosed his steamship ticket as evidence, which is down below. So that clears that up. But what I want to show you is what he put down on his original preliminary form top and his revised form about additional names that he may have used. So the first question when I looked at this was, which name is he referring to? Is the first name that was misunderstood or the last name? And it turns out, I'll show you, that it's actually the last name. It's not the first name. So here we have on the top on the original form that he says that a U.S. clerk wrote it that way, Benny Pivlovic, and could not understand me. And for same reason, the Red Star Line, the ticket agents, wrote the second name on my ticket to this country, Bella Pilazik, CZYK. And that, he says, is going to be the name on the steamship ticket. When he resubmits the form with a New York correct port now, he redoes the used another name, Benny Pilisic, Bella, etc., although there's some variation there. But he's indicating that there was a misunderstanding about a U.S. clerk or somebody in the Red Star Line. So I'll show you some other documents here. His actual manifest on the top, you can see what he came in on. And then the book index below, which shows the sheet and line he's on. He's going to Clarksburg, West Virginia also. So neither one of those is how he spelled his name, which is Pelarcik. Now, it turns out that this preliminary form has a number of places where he has to sign his name. Now, most of the form was done by someone else, by a helper. If you go down and look at 26, the question on that preliminary form is, did you yourself fill out this form? And he put down no. If not, who filled this out? And he shows the person. But when it comes to 13, he had to sign your full and correct name in your own handwriting. And he did Wojciech Bilavsik. And then sign name you are now using. And now we see a nickname. It looks like Benji, Benzi. And then on 26, he also had to sign his name in full for the whole application. And again, he starts with a B name. So it's not Benny and Bella that seems to be the problem. It's his perception of the misunderstanding and the name is his family name. Now, I looked up Bella on Wikipedia, and interesting enough, it said C. Votek. So I went and looked at Votek, and if you look at the very last sentence here, it says that some Adalbert of Prague was associated with Bella in some way, but the names have no linguistic relationship with each other. And the important part, that last sentence, via the same artificial process, have been the names of Volchek / Adalbert assigned the Hungarian name Bella. So that was a nickname there. So what about this clerk? What's going on about this U.S. clerk? Well, he arrived in October 1913 when there were no entry documents required of immigrants, well before quotas or visas. I don't know what U.S. clerk he would have interacted with in Europe at that time period. The only U.S. officials he should have met in Europe were members of the Public Health Service validating immigrant vaccination health cards, which had been provided by the shipping company. I'll show you what they look like. So these immigrants were given this inspection card. It was stamped, their names were on it, the ship was on it. And in addition to that, the manifest sheet and line were on it from the Public Health Service. And then on the back it says vaccinated, etc. Marion Smith indicates that prior to 1918, the U.S. did not require an immigrant to show any document to U.S. authorities at the point of arrival other than the manifest submitted by the ship captain. That said, many immigrants were asked by the immigrant inspector to produce a letter mailed within 90 days from the friend or relative at their destination just to confirm that they were expected. If he is referring to his arrival at Ellis Island from the Kroonland in October 1913, and if he had been detained or sent to the Special Inquiry Board by immigration inspectors, or there was another list for simple detained people, his name would have been typed on a special list, which was filmed with the ship manifest. I looked for his name in sheet 38, line 23, on those lists, and he is not on them. Of course, if he couldn't remember the port of entry, he might have misremembered all of the stuff that he's putting down on his preliminary form. For the Red Star misunderstanding, the ship manifest name list from sold tickets and signed declarations should have been made at the port of departure, Antwerp, not at Ellis Island, which had nothing to do with Ellis Island, and was the sole responsibility of the shipping company. However, he could see, and the immigrants had to wear these identification tags, which would have their name on it. It would show the ship, it would show where they were on the manifest, and it would show their names. And I think that Ellis Island had nothing to do with this. The ship companies provided them. The immigrants had to wear them. He might associate Ellis Island with the wearing of this tag. So the real question is, after he has this misunderstanding, what did he actually use after immigrating to the U.S.? The first time I see him, he did modify his name to W-O-J-T-C-H, and I found a reference to his marriage certificate in 1919 in Chicago. And you can see here that he used Wojciech Pilasek, the name that he put on his naturalization preliminary form. So he knew that those names on his ticket, etc., were not his name and did not use them. Let's look at a bonus case study. Then we're going to finish, and then I'm going to do an addenda on now that the Strunk family. This is a bonus case study. Persistence yields results, and suing didn't hurt. And we're going to look at somebody named Sam Gordon. He was born in 1889. He arrived in 1913, but his papers, his preliminary form, probably, and his petition preliminary papers didn't occur until a decade later. So Sam Gordon, and this is a story that actually started my interest in the entire area of immigrant names and documents. Sam Gordon, a, quote, prosperous citizen of Springfield, Illinois. He was actually a junk dealer, a general name. He sold auto parts. Was searching for used auto parts. Was searching for documentation that Israel Gorinda, quote, his birthday name, arrived on the SS Argentina to New York on December 5th, 1913. The immigration officials told Sam that they could find no record of a vessel of the above name. It makes sense. Could this possibly be a misunderstanding? Could they have said they could find no record from the vessel for the above name? How do I know all this? Because Sam Gordon's request was reported in the New York Times of October 25th, 1927, page 48. And I had this article in my files for a long time. I sometimes do newspaper searches. Found this, gee, that's real interesting. Maybe someday I'll use it. And today is the day. More likely, as you saw before, Sam received the no record of your arrival has been found, give us more information. And he probably resubmitted his preliminary petition with the same information and got the same results. He was sure he was on that ship. He was at an impasse. Sam then hired a local attorney and then a consultant on immigration in New York, a person by the name of H. Ellie Goldsmith. H.L.E. Goldsmith. And he was told that Goldsmith asked to see the Argentina manifest. He was told that he could not do so, as manifests are the private property of the U.S. government, immigration officials, and may not be seen or examined by anybody except such officials. Now, I should point out to you that H.L.E. Goldsmith was a character. He was in and out of jail for naturalization fraud. Indeed, I found this on a folder at the catalog of the National Archives on Goldsmith. It was not yet available to the public, but here's what the description of this folder is. The records in these files document H.L.E. Goldsmith's history of dubious methods of advising aliens seeking to enter the United States and or to remain here illegally. In foreign language newspapers, he inserted advertisements in Yiddish and other languages directed to potential immigrants. The narrow information continues. The records demonstrate how many branches of the criminal justice system work to curtail the activities of a man whom government officials considered a racketeer, one who solicited aliens and gave them false claims of his effectiveness in helping both the legal aliens already in the U.S. who wanted to remain here and those seeking to gain admission. And I have a 1939 New York Times article where he was given 6 years for immigration fraud. So you wonder about his role here and whether Sam Gordon could have resolved this another way. In any case, Goldsmith then sued Ellis Island Immigration Commissioner for access to the manifest. A trial was set in New York City for October 24, 1927. I could find no further articles on the possible trial. It could have actually been dismissed. But surprise, on October 24, 1927, a certificate of arrival was issued to Sam for the SS Argentina. Show you that next. So that sure doesn't look like Sam Gorinda, does it? So it was issued to a Suzul Horinda, and the date is exactly the same date as when that trial was supposed to start. Now, we're going to try and figure out what happens here. I could ask why the inspectors didn't at first find his manifest line, but that is based on an assumption. I think instead the question is why the clerks didn't issue a certificate of arrival based on the information Sam provided and what their search of the Argentina's manifest revealed. So let's ask some questions. He waited 7 years to declare in 1920 and could have petitioned as early as 1923 instead of cutting it thin in 1927. So here is his declaration, and I'll show you parts of it. You can see here that the New York Times in 1927 lists his name as Israel Gorinda. The 1920 declaration has him as SRRLH Gorinda, while his petition, these are in his own handwriting, shows him as Israel Gorinda. Now, one possibility, by the way, for all this is that the manifest asks, are you able to read and write? I think that's a general question, including not just English, but your native language. And what he says is, he's on the bottom, he says, no, at that time he could not read or write. Here is his petition. He says, I'm Israel Gorinda. I'm also known as SRRLH Gorinda, known as Sam Gordon. And as part of this petition, he asked for a name change. And he actually asked for a name change with Gordon spelled with an E-N at the end. What would the Ellis Island clerks find with a search on the Argentina's book index for December 5th, 1913? And in general, they looked at book indexes first to find people. Well, here is the book index. You go down the line, let me blow this up. You'll see that they did it as an H at the beginning, Horrendon, and then as Z-U-L. So now we add that to the list. We have the book index on the top, adding that, and then some other signatures there. And if you notice that the R in Israel looks like the Z in Suzul. It was so difficult to read this, by the way, that the people who transcribed the Ellis Island manifests decided that the first letter wasn't an H, but was an F. And in fact, that's when my wife looked at it initially, she thought that was an F. So if they looked it up on the book index under F, they wouldn't have found them. There might be a number of reasons why they didn't see them. So is the last name a red flag? Well, this is interesting. So we have Horrendin, Horrenda, Gorenda, Gorendin. What's going on here? There is, on Jewish Gen, 10 myths of genealogy. And one of the myths is spelling of surnames is important. The person says, no, they're not important. Names are important. But the way names are spelled from these immigrants, you could have a number of different varieties, variations. And at the end of that, they say transliterations from one language to another creates infinite spelling variances. For instance, there's no H sound in the Russian Cyrillic alphabet. So Jewish names such as Hirsch might become Gersh, utilizing the G sound instead. I wonder if the clerks at Ellis Island knew this, that if they had a G beginning last name from Eastern Europe, they might want to look under the H's also to see if that person is there. So that's an explanation of why you might have the G or the H. What about the first name? Well, as I say, the New York Times article said he came in under Israel. That's interviewed him. Petition witnesses knew him as Israel. His gravestone shows his Hebrew name was Israel. So what do we deduce? Well, we deduce that somehow or other that name he gave has something to do with Israel. And I looked it up, and I found actually a article online. And the person says, what is this name, Suzul? And one says, well, you know, it's probably a handwritten R could be easily mixed with Z, and Srul is a common male name in Yiddish for Israel. It's a nickname for Yisrael. So that explains both names, and maybe the clerks at Ellis Island were versed enough in this to recognize that. But there are some other problems as well. Were there any other major non-name red flags that could cause a rejection for a certificate of arrival for this immigrant? So here is something about Sam's age. He indicates he was born in 1889. It turns out that there's a variety of years he put down in various documents of what he was born. He said he was 27 on his actual manifest. And it is a 27, not a 24. But the variety of years that he put down was ridiculous, actually. So I don't think it's his birth year that was the problem. And here, one of the myths is that people knew their birth dates. Wrong. Many immigrants did not know their birth dates. Entering the U.S. before 1924, and that's not quite correct. Marion Smith would say 1918, required no documentation, just a ticket. Many brought no identification papers with them. Even if they knew their birth dates, it was usually in relation to a Jewish holiday. They had no easy way of translating this Jewish calendar date into the secular Gregorian calendar date. But there's a much more serious problem here. On his declaration, on his petition in 1927, on his petition on the New York Times, he all said where he was born, and the best I can make it is he was born in Belarus, around Minsk. And here is his birth town on his preliminary form. There are two places on the manifest where they're asked, where are you born? Last, or at least last permanent residence and place of birth. And in both cases, Israel put down Rahman. Didn't put down the Lakowitz. And there is a manifest essay on Jewish Gen saying at times verification clerks could not be sure the record found really did relate to the person who claimed that arrival record on their naturalization application. If there were enough significant differences, the clerk could not certify the arrival record, even though they found it. Minor differences were routine, ages 1 or 2 years off, height off by a few inches, or Americanized names, Jacob for Yankel, for example. But many years difference in age, date of birth, differing eye color, or place of birth prohibited certification without further explanation. In those cases, the clerk issued a record, Form 505 or 404, but issued no certificate of arrival, hence the frequent annotation, no CA. Now, these annotations were put in mostly for CA searches from 1927 on. Before that, you won't see them on the manifest. So here is a 1907 ship manifest. I'll blow it up. You'll see that on the right side there are a lot of numbers there. On the top you'll see no CA, no certificate of arrival. The numbers designate the court that asked for the certificate and the certificate numbers, which cannot be used to actually look things up. And a Form 505, I actually found one of these, is just kind of like a transcript of what they found on the manifest. And 20, there's an area for remarks, and then on the side of it, it says this form is insufficient as a basis for a petition for naturalization. So it's kind of interesting. They would fill this out and also the certificate of arrival in some cases. So that completes the main part of Part 3. I'm going to have an addenda in a second. So this is another of my JDW talks. And I think I have YouTube talks on genealogy topics, natural history topics, miscellaneous topics. So let's proceed to an addenda about Friedrich and Katharina Strunk and their 5 manifest children. One of them being that you saw, Adam Shearer. Besides Adam Shearer, were there any other of the remaining 4 not from the stated parents? Well, I'm going to see whether that's the case or not. Now, the best way of doing this, of course, would be to find their records in their home country, but they're not online. I don't know if they've ever been filmed. Instead, I'm going to have to rely on correlations. So this information is from their ship's manifests. Friedrich actually came in twice. We find a ship manifest from Friedrich Strunk, laborer, 38, arrived New York on February 4th, 1903, on the Zealand. Last residence, UJ period SOVE, Hungary. Going to his brother, Jacob Strunk, on St. Clair Street in Cleveland, Ohio. Never been to the U.S. And then 6 years later, a 44-year-old Frederick Strung arrived in May of 1909 with his wife and 5 children of the Argentina. His last residence is QY SOVE, Hungary. He's going to his brother, Heinrich Strung, in St. Clair Street in Cleveland, Ohio. I should mention a lot of people from this community were going to Cleveland, and a lot of them were going to St. Clair Street. I couldn't find them on actually that street of his brothers. He stated he had been in the U.S. in Cleveland, 1904 to 1908. So on the 1909 manifest, he was asked whether he was ever in the United States before, and if so, when and where. And the answer you can see was yes, Cleveland, Ohio, 1904 to 1908. You can just barely make it out. He's on the fourth one from the top. Yes, 1904, 1908, Cleveland. Highlight that. Here's what I got from the SteveMorse.org site on the transcribed family. Adam is a shearer and Elizabeth was deported. The transcribed last name was the best the transcriber could do with the manifest and decided it was Strnny. I searched for the family in 1910 in Cleveland using FamilySearch.org. The only one I came up with that looked good, it was incomplete, was this particular one that will blow up for you. This family unit lives on St. Clair Avenue in Cleveland. And it's obvious there's no manifest children here. We have a slight difference in spelling of his first name. We have strung versus strunk, although I'll show you that Elizabeth is a strung above. Fred in 1909 was 44 years old. He's a year later, 45. Katerina, 1909, was 42 years old. Now she's 44. That's within reason. If we look at when they arrived and what their citizenship status is, then it's very interesting. It's incomplete because they're all foreign born. They should have at least alien there. But if you look at arrival years, Frederick shows 1902 and Kate 1909. I expected 1909 for both, but the 1902 might be his memory for his first trip. It also shows Frederick with PA of First Papers. He was in the U.S. for 4 years previous, enough time to meet the requirements for submitting PA of First Papers or the Declaration of Intention, although I could not find such a record in online Ohio records at FamilySearch.org. But what I want to do when dealing with correlations here, is I want to look at Mike Strunk. Comes in 1907. Now, you notice that the head of the family is Peter Klein. Keep that in mind. And there's a match for him. Arriving on the Kaiser Wilhelm der Grosse, May 1907 from UJSOVE, he's going to an acquaintance, Peter Klein. And note the people around in the other lines are also from UJSOVE, and they're going to Cleveland, and a couple of them are going to St. Clair Street. So again, this is a strung, S-T-R, actually, this is a strunk, S-T-R-U-N-K, Michael, and he's going to Peter Klein. This is the family on the manifest. Frederick was stamped as a non-immigrant alien. You can see him on the top. Generally, non-immigrant aliens are tourists, students, business travelers, temporary workers who went to the U.S. for fixed periods of time. They're lawfully admitted aliens who are not lawful permanent residents. But this is 1909, well before quotas and required papers to enter the U.S. I'm not sure why he was so stamped. He was basically a resident alien after that number of years. We're going to see that term again. Now, there's a lot to unpack here with census residences, relationship to the head of the family, who is Peter Klein. Let's start with Peter's wife, Elizabeth. Who is she? Well, let me point out something, that there's a cousin of theirs, probably Elizabeth's, in the household, and I want you to remember that Dane's surname is Potocki, P-O-T-O-K-I. I'm going to show you that that is the name of Elizabeth's mother's maiden name. Another correlation. Now, Frederick and Kate are in-laws of Peter. They're on their first marriage. Peter is married with Elizabeth for 4 years. Note that Frederick and Kate have been married 24 years, and it's also their first marriage. So we are not dealing with a blended family here that might muddy the biological relationships. Therefore, the census shows that Elizabeth here is the daughter of Frederick and Kate. This Elizabeth, married 4 years, is not the same as manifest aborted Elizabeth. If we are dealing with the same 1909-1910 family, we would have two Elizabeths, age 22, and the other one, if alive, 16. Could manifest Elizabeth be an unrelated child on the 1909 manifest? Note that Kate shows 5 births and 3 living children. I'm going to discuss that later. Now, I found Pete and Elizabeth Strung's marriage record. Elizabeth is a Strung, daughter of Frederick Strung and Katharina Regal. She's not a Regal. I think my proof is not only Dane's last name, but I also found Elizabeth's death certificate here, and we'll blow that up. It asks for the name of her parents. She says, my parents are Frederick Strung and Catherine Pataki. So that's another correlation that we're dealing with the same parents. So far, I have tied the 1910 census Frederick and Kate to the 1909 manifest family by their town, origin, family names, and close matches of ages. Also some correlation to their entry dates. A Cleveland Michael Strung may further connect 1909 to 1910. On the 1909 manifest, we had a Michael Strung, age 7, born around 1902, although I could not find them in the 1910 census. But he was in Cleveland. How do I know that? Well, let's do a couple of things. Here's the petition for citizenship for Michael Strung. He states he was born in 1901 at Nova Sove, S-O-V-E, Yugoslavia. He arrived in 1920 on the Nordam. Now, to apply for U.S. citizenship, one had to reside in the U.S. for at least 5 continuous years, the last year in the same state where the naturalization would occur. So if he left the U.S., the clock for citizenship starts when he comes back in 1920. Next, we will look at his birth town, then Michael's and Charlotte's marriage, his wife, and then his 1920 ship manifest. So first we have his petition here. You can see he's Michael Strung. He's married to Charlotte, where he's born, etc. His occupation here is an assembler. On his declaration, he said he was a bodybuilder. And there is the ship. So I found this website, frequently named village names in Yugoslavia, and you find out we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about UJSOVE is also NOVISOVE with a slight modification. So that's not a problem. We have here the marriage certificate between Michael and Charlotte. And there he says, actually, I guess it's his marriage certificate that I saw, bodybuilder. He says his name is Michael Strung, that his father's name is Frederick, and his mother's maiden name is Catherine Pataki. So I think we're dealing with the same person here. The same person as the 1909 manifest. Here is his 1920 ship, the Nordam. He's now Michael Strong, he's strong in 1920. And when it asks for his last permanent residence, he puts down USA Cleveland. So here is a person who is not born in the U.S., but his last permanent resident is in Cleveland. Yet, if you look to the very right, he's stamped non-immigrant alien. And who is he leaving behind? He's leaving his father, Friedrich Strong, in Nova Sova, Yugoslavia. So his father is back again. back to the home country, and maybe a lot of the members of his family brought over in 1909 and back there as well. I don't know. When Michael was asked whether ever before in the U.S., and if so, when and where, he says yes, and the range he gives is 1909, which is the manifest name that he was on that came in, to 1920. So this is dated 1920. He made a quick trip out of Cleveland to Yugoslavia, then back again, and he's going to an uncle, Jacob Strong, which I didn't mention it, but that was one of Frederick's brothers. He said he was going to the country when he first came to the U.S., not the second time. So back to the original question. I think there's enough evidence to show that the Strong parents on the 1909 manifest are the same people in the Peter Klein household in 1910. And I'm going to emphasize next that important part of the census sheet, which is that Kate had 5 children, of which 3 are still alive. And you notice the 5 is in a different sort of handwriting density. So someone changed that. Someone changed that number. So if Kate Strong had 5 children, 2 died before 1910. Those alive in 1910, I think we've established, are Elizabeth Klein and Michael Strong. I think the 3rd living child was probably Katerina, age 25, in 1909. I checked the censuses and marriage and death indexes of Cleveland for her without success. My no evidence feeling is that perhaps she returned with manifest Elizabeth when she was deported. With Katerina, that makes Kate's 3 living children in 1910. That leaves deported Elizabeth and Johann. If they were actual offspring of them, of Frederick and Kate, they should have died between 1909 and 1910. However, most deaths in those days were during infancy, and I feel there's a problem with 2 Elizabeth named daughters. So it's possible that one or both of the remaining names were individuals like Adam Shearer, embedded in the family to get them into the U.S. to their parents. What do you think? If you can provide more information, I'll add it to the show notes. And with that, I will end this very long presentation.